Still misunderstood to this day.
And the Bible, I'm thinking, isn't an accurate translation of what he was trying to
Not
teach
always,
us
no.
and tell us.
No. Much of what, in that sense, that individual was teaching is very similar to what you are now understanding in what you call your metaphysical age. The idea is that simply people back then couldn't understand it. But to put it in a more fundamental sense, Yeshua, or as you say, Jesus, really did not intend in any way, shape, or form to create followers. Intended to create leaders, equals. Did not intend to create Christians per se, intended to let you all know you are Christ's. That's the greatest misunderstanding of the information. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. So much of what you're understanding today is the idea that that individual was teaching. Even down to the concept of how powerfully your beliefs create your reality, yes?
Yes.
Because did not, in that sense, at least to some degree, the Bible quote him as saying, it is your belief, it is your faith that has made the difference? Yes? And did it not also say that when Yeshua even went back to his hometown, because people there only knew him as a carpenter and did not believe in the things that other people said he could do none of those things in his hometown. And the Bible says so, very clearly. You understand?
Yes.
It's all about the idea of your belief system. It's all about the idea of what you know to be true. It's all about your actions, all about your alignment. This is all that individual was saying, and that's what he meant when he said, I am the way. He meant, be this way. I'm the example. I'm the way. Be like me.
The story of Adam, Eve, and Lilith.
Yes.
I was wondering if maybe you can shed some light on that. And did these people actually exist?
Well, in a manner of speaking, yes, although the story, you know, in a sense, has been rendered into something simplified as a tale, as a metaphor. The idea of, in the ancient language of the Anunnaki, that injected their genetics into Homo erectus to create Homo sapien, is that the male version of Homo sapien they created in their language is Adama. The female version is Eva, which you have transliterated into Adam and Eve over time. So the idea is that, of course, there was a first male and a first female, but the idea has been truncated, collapsed, condensed into the metaphorical story that you know in your Bible. Lilith represents again the idea of the continuation of the line of Homo sapien in the genetic alterations by the Anunnaki, and represents kind of the concept of independence, the ultimate independence of the human race, and the balance point that needed to be achieved when it was recognized that Homo sapien had been created, and offered the third alternative. As always, we talk about the idea that there is a trinity in existence, not just a duality. So the concept of Lilith and the feminine principle in balance, the masculine and feminine principle in balance in Lilith, creates the midpoint, the third reality, the balance point in the Trinity between the two dualities of male and female.
And why is it that Lilith, it seems to be that she was taken out of the modern version of what we learn?
Because as a patriarch, he grew and wanted to reinforce the idea of male dominance, the concept of the balance point of male and female in one body was anathema to them. And they sought to remove it so that they would retain control and empowerment over others and over the female side.
Okay, and that's interesting. And was this all done in a laboratory in Temple Mount, at Temple Mount?
There were many different labs around your planet, but the primary one was in the Middle East. The idea, again, is that, remember, this wasn't all done all at once. This took some time. So the idea of this story is quite condensed, and it condenses many, many decades, even hundreds of years of time in the creation of Homo sapien.
The Garden of Eden, can you shed some light on what that was and maybe where it was?
Well, again, in the Middle East, as given, between what you call the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in the Fertile Crescent being the primary contact point and laboratory and civilization that the Anunnaki established when they came to Earth and spread out from there.
Okay, and the serpent that came to Eve, who or what was this?
This is simply an indication of the awakening of the genetic markers that would allow the female to be closer to the concept of the original Anunnaki genetic structure. This is why you have the double intertwined serpents on your medical caduceus still today as an indication of the genetics laboratories and the genetics that were injected into Homo erectus to create Homo sapien, being that in the feminine side there was an alteration that allowed the feminine side to become a little bit more aware of the situation than the masculine side and a little bit closer in expression to the original Anunnaki genetic strain.
That's interesting.
It also represents, therefore, the idea of ancient knowledge, that in a sense, because of the genetic alterations in the feminine form, there was more capability of accessing the knowledge of the Anunnaki.
In the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, the Anunnaki, is that translated into Elohim?
For the most part, yes. Although the Elohim can also be other beings that were encountered from time to time, but in general, it's a reference to the ancient Anus, yes.
The story of Exodus.
Yes, yes.
Did the Jews know that were they aware that it was aliens that were taking them out of Egypt? Or
not as such. They didn't really comprehend the concept of aliens in the same way that you do today. They understood that the beings were from a higher dimensional realm, but the idea to them at that time, in their understanding, is what they ultimately decided was beings from heaven, beings from above.
Why did they save the Jews from Egypt, but they didn't protect them or save them in World War II from the Holocaust?
It was important to allow certain genetics from the Anunnaki line to survive up to a certain point. But beyond that, once there was dominion of the humans of the earth to make their own decisions, their decisions could not be intervened or interfered with beyond a certain point.
The Star of David, where did that come about, and why is it the symbol of the Jews?
It is the symbol of the relationship between those beings and those people, and in general between the above and the below. It is the intersection of the higher dimensions with the lower physical reality. It is a flattened form of the Merkaba.
I would really like to know what the interaction was like between Moses and the ETs at the top of Mount Sinai.
Some of it was physiological, some of it was telepathic. He was invited into a craft. Many things he was made to forget, but some things he was allowed to remember, as according to what was necessary for the proper approach and interactions and relationship between those beings and the people at that time so that they could be guided.
You mentioned that the tablets with the 10 Commandments,
Yes.
they were of crystalline form.
Yes.
And
But they weren't commandments.
Can you expand more on some of those commandments or the
They have been
laws?
misinterpreted over time. For example, you say in your literature now that the first commandment is, I am the Lord your God, thou shalt not have false gods before me. The original text is, I am all that is, anything that you represent me by is also me, therefore there can be no false gods. See the difference?
Can you give us a few more? Please.
The idea, again, of keeping the Sabbath holy
is the idea again of understanding the state of being, of grace, that you naturally give off when you are in your truth and in alignment. Yes? And it's not just for a single day necessarily, but it was at the time considered the idea of take some time in a cyclic way to always go back into that state and remember who you are and then proceed from there. So it just became a weekly thing over time.
And what was the light on Mount Sinai and the burning bush?
Some of the extraterrestrials that Moses interacted with were the idea of the Anunnaki attempting to correct what the original group of Anunnaki caused by the creation of Homo sapiens on your planet, and attempted to guide and preserve certain genetic lines that would allow for the eventual evolution of the Earth into the sixth hybrid race. Some were not Anunnaki. We have been asked this question before, and we are not allowed to discuss that race. The idea of the light is simply the light from a craft, the energy from a craft landing on the mountain that interacted with Moses. The idea of the burning bush, again, a holographic projection of energy that was interpreted as fire. Similar in many ways to what people on your planet have been experiencing today as orbs of energy, orbs of light. So interpreted in an old-fashioned way, because that was all that was understood. Energy at the time was not understood in the way you understand it now scientifically. Therefore, it was perceived as a fire, when all it was basically an orb of glowing energy to represent a communication modality, a probe that would allow for communication to occur between the extraterrestrials and the individual experiencing the idea of the burning of the orb.
The story of Noah's Ark.
In a sense, it did happen, but it's not limited to the one story that's in the Bible, and there are some things that are a little bit different than what was related. But it basically talks about the flood. It talks about the time when an asteroid struck the Atlantic Ocean, wiped out Atlantis, and caused massive change and tsunamis in different places in North, South, Central America, in Europe, in Africa, in the Mediterranean. Many different people traveled on different kinds of boats and vehicles to save themselves and perpetuate some of their culture. That is the story of Noah's Ark. But if you actually examine many different cultures around your world, you'll find they all have similar stories, except for the South Sea Islanders who live in the Pacific, who didn't experience that because the asteroid fell in the Atlantic. So there are different Noah's Ark stories by different names in various cultures in the North, Central, South Americas, in Europe, in Africa, the Mediterranean, and so on and so forth. They all represent a general reality, a general truth of a massive flood catastrophe from an asteroidal or cometary strike.
It's very interesting.
Yes, it is.
And these people that build the boats, who warned them? Who told them to build the boats?
Well, some of their own people may have, because again, remember that throughout your civilization, there have always been intuitives. There have always been mediums and channels and people who could converse with beings on other levels, and sometimes they might receive such information from extraterrestrial sources who might say, hey, there's a big rock on the way. You better get ready. So it can be many different sources for different cultures.
I'm left with the distinct impression that virtually all angels described as light beings that came from the sky and the stars in most religious doctrines are actually highly advanced aliens from other civilizations that have visited Earth. Is that correct?
Not all, but most. Extra dimensionals, extraterrestrials, beings of higher frequency, but sometimes spirit beings as well that can manifest themselves to appear as if they are physical when they may not be. So it's a variety of things. Yeah.